Okay, we are live. Showtime. Hello, ladies. Welcome. Good to see everybody. All right, we'd like to begin our second session of the day. I'd like to introduce Dr. Marsha Dickson. She's the president and co-founder of Better Buying. She's also joined by Kelly Duncan, strategic partnership manager. Their talk today is on the supply chain resiliency post-pandemic, leveraging supplier input and data to improve efficiency and protect workers. So I'd like to remind everybody really quick that we do have a chat function. If you have any questions, please post them there. You're on Zoom. Also to our Facebook Live viewers, same thing. Please post your questions in the Facebook feed and we will address them at the end of the presentation. And without further ado, ladies, the virtual floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for having us. And good morning, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon or evening, wherever you are. As Jason mentioned, I'm Dr. Marsha Dickson, president and co-founder of the Better Buying Institute. And the organizers of the show asked me to speak with you today about, kind of what the future of supply chain sustainability looks like, especially as it relates to our work at Better Buying. And my colleague Kelly Duncanson and I will also spend some time discussing the importance of open communication and data in decision making, and how brands and retailers are leveraging new tools and focusing on the business people behind manufacturing to improve working conditions throughout their supply chains, strengthen business relationships, and really maximize profitability. So as those of you participating in this show probably know better than anyone, the impacts of the pandemic are far-reaching and devastating and continue to affect all consumer goods brands, retailers, and their suppliers, especially those in the apparel industry. We've seen buyers across the globe taking pretty extreme actions in an effort to minimize their exposure to risk, and many have not considered or appropriately addressed the ripple effect on suppliers and workers that those decisions have had. So the pandemic does not mean, however, that decades of sustainability progress no longer matter. In fact, consumers continue to expect that brands respect human rights throughout their supply chains. And it's more important than ever that we focus on supply chain resiliency so that we can recover and also withstand the shock of future disruption. We need everybody working together in fluid ways to be able to meet the demands of a crazy market that, sometimes will be shocked like it has been this year. So today we have an opportunity to tackle long-standing supply chain sustainability roadblocks with renewed clarity through a reliance on data and an unwavering commitment to strengthening relationships between buyers and suppliers in support of sustainability goals, people, planet, and profit. So I'm a former retiring professor from the University of Delaware, and I've been advocating for decades for business that prioritizes workers and the environment alongside profitability. And it's obvious to me that any efforts to pivot to address changing consumer demand and market uncertainty will be pretty futile if workers are treated as commodities or taken for granted, and suppliers aren't respected as true partners in achieving sustainability goals. And that's really why I co-founded the Better Buying Institute, which advocates for the industry-wide transformation of buyer purchasing practices so that business relationships support buyers and suppliers in achieving their financial, environmental, and social responsibility goals. To achieve this transformation will require big changes and small changes across the various functions of buyer companies and including the merchandising function, design, development, sourcing, and others. Luckily, it's not just me. There's finally growing consensus that poor buyer purchasing practices can prevent supplier compliance with company codes of conduct and put at risk the lives and dignity of workers in supply chains. Poor purchasing practices specifically can lead to excessive overtime and forced labor, poor wages, use of precarious labor, such as temporary or migrant labor without the rights of permanent staff, and health and safety risks, sometimes as a result of unauthorized subcontracting into unsafe and unmonitored facilities. Now, purchasing practices aren't the sole reason these problems exist. They are, however, exacerbated when suppliers aren't given enough time to do their work and when they do not have the consistency of business and financial sustainability from which all good things flow for workers and the environment. So really more than ever, we need to take the old adage of what gets measured gets managed to heart because it's really not fully permeated day-to-day supply chain management yet. The lack of fully integrated sustainability work throughout companies and the absence of reliable data demonstrating accountability for it has prevented the necessary scale and scope of corporate responsibility progress and true supply chain resiliency, making it difficult for suppliers to protect workers and improve efficiency and profitability. So I think, what we're saying is that everything's all kind of connected, that, being sustainable and being good for workers also requires being good to the suppliers and working more collaboratively and more efficiently together. The pandemic has brought this challenge to the forefront. Buyers need to collaborate with suppliers as partners in order to improve data collection, communication, efficiency, and protection for workers. I'm going to invite my colleague Kelly Duncanson to join now, and we'll take a deeper look at buyer-supplier relationships and share some highlights of our most recent global supplier survey. Kelly?
Thanks, Marsha. So now we'll transition into a discussion about some of the challenges and opportunities facing suppliers and buyers when it comes to improving purchasing practices and building stronger business relationships. So Marsha, to start off, could you tell us a bit about why and how Better Buying collects data from suppliers?
Yeah. And I just want to start with saying, because this is not always abundantly obvious, this is I think one of the only, if not the only, initiative that asks suppliers to evaluate their customers, not the other way around. There's so much testing and assessing and evaluating suppliers, but not this direction. So we're collecting data from suppliers about their specific customers' purchasing practices. And we have two different tools we use for collecting data globally. The Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index is a detailed rating system that allows suppliers to anonymously rate 7 key categories of purchasing practices of the companies that buy their products. And they do that by providing objective business data about that stem from that relationship over the last year. The data from this Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index helps brands and retailers understand which practices can be improved. For example, we ask things about buyers forecasting, the timing of the forecasting, the accuracy of the forecasting. We ask about the design and sample development. We ask about costing, ordering practices, payment, time and action calendar, and how deadlines are met or not, and sustainability and compliance practices as well. So really, we ask about everything encompassing that bringing product to market, from the time that you're envisioning the sales for the upcoming season to the time that's in production and delivered to you and paid for. We launched with a focus on apparel and textiles, but our survey is now being used in a range of hard good categories such as housewares, toys, electronics, and everything, holiday decorations. It's quite an interesting array of things. The rating system is primarily used by tier 1 suppliers, and we define supplier as the company that you order with, that you have a business relationship with, which is sometimes a factory and often not. So, if you think about tier 1 suppliers, they may be multinational manufacturers, and we're dealing with corporate headquarters in that case. They could even be an intermediary, though most of our suppliers submitting data are factory owners. Now, we're planning to build out a new version of the Better Buying Purchasing Practices that will accommodating an increasing array of industries, but the focus has been on apparel and textiles and footwear. Now, we have a second instrument that's really just starting to be used, and it's called the Better Buying Partner Index. And as compared to the Better Buying Purchasing Practice Index, this measures 11 It's a short survey. It's subjective. It measures 11 areas of practice at a high level to identify broad problems areas. So in contrast to the Better Purchasing Practices Index that might determine and identify that you're not very good, a company's not very good at keeping its suppliers informed about what to expect in terms of sale, to provide a forecast, to make updates with that. The Better Buying Partner Index will instead get a sense of, does the supplier have enough time? Are the financial arrangements working? Is there corruption and bribery present? So key kind of bucket problem areas at a high level. And this partner index actually can be used more broadly, including, for example, with raw materials and packaging suppliers and others, but really throughout the brand and retailer supply chain. So you can take that all the way down through your supply chain to evaluate how the relationships are working. So we published the results of our latest rating cycle using the detailed Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index just 2 weeks ago, and found really meaningful progress is being made by brands and retailers who've been subscribing and working with us for a few years now. So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about that. And of course, you'll want to read the report. But Kelly, why don't you share some of the details about that latest report?
Sure. So our 2020 index report is based on data from Q4 of 2019. So I do just want to clarify that this data was collected before COVID. We had 22 brands and retailers invite more than 2,000 global suppliers to participate in this survey. And 10 of our subscribers had participated in the 2018 rating cycle as well. So they were therefore able to compare their year-over-year performance. And we looked at their net improvement in each of the 7 categories that Marsha outlined by adding up the number of practices where their performance improved and subtracting the number of practices where their performance declined. And we also zoomed in on select high impact questions in each category. So these are questions that are more heavily weighted due to the high degree of impact that these practices have on supplier sustainability efforts. And in the report, we specifically highlighted the changes that we were seeing in companies' forecasting, costing, and payment practices.
Yeah, and this report, as Kelly mentioned, focused on year-over-year improvements especially, and found that several brands had been making meaningful improvements. And Kelly, what were some of the takeaways that you thought were important from that analysis?
Sure. So we found that 5 of the 10 companies had a positive net improvement in their forecasting practices. So that means their performance improved in more areas than it declined. And improved forecasting provides suppliers with the visibility they need in order to plan production responsibly. So this not only yields benefits in terms of production efficiency and reduced financial pressure on manufacturers, but it also helps suppliers maintain a more stable workforce and decrease their reliance on things like temporary labor and excessive overtime in order to flex their production capacity with unexpected increases or decreases in their orders. And this is especially important as our industry weathers unexpected supply chain disruptions. Additionally, we saw that 8 of the 10 companies had fewer suppliers left with unutilized capacity due to forecasting inaccuracies, and 6 of the 10 had fewer suppliers left with excess materials. And then in terms of costing practices, half of the companies had more suppliers reporting that 100% of their orders were priced to cover the costs of compliant production. We also saw that 8 of the 10 companies improved by decreasing their use of high-pressure cost negotiation strategies. And improved costing is critical not only for suppliers' business survival, but also for ensuring safe conditions for workers by protecting them from things like excessively low wages or unauthorized subcontracting, informal employment, and other precarious or abusive situations.
Yeah, those are such important findings. And I think about, here we are in a sourcing show with a lot of business deals. I hope a lot of business deals going on, and that costing is so important because we have to pay for everything we ask for. And sometimes everybody rushes to the judgment of, oh, that means we're going to have to pay higher prices, and that may be the case, but also there's an opportunity to look at where are we wasting money in the corporate headquarters of brands and retailers, because if you're doing things redundantly to what the suppliers are doing, if you're being sloppy in the work, then you're creating administrative costs. You're duplicating costs that that the supplier is also incurring, and it's just adding waste into the system. So there's also a really important opportunity, with data like from Better Buying, to really drill in and look at the kind of places where you can improve efficiencies, really. One other finding that I was really excited to see was that at least half of the 10 companies made notable improvements in payment and terms practices by paying suppliers on time and in full. And paying suppliers what they expect to receive when they expect to receive it is critical for cash flow and ability to pursue all aspects of sustainability. This is something that when we started doing the detailed research to build out the Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index and to really drill down to what are the most impactful practices on supplier businesses and on their ability to provide good working conditions, I guess I was a little surprised to discover just the extent that contracts were routinely broken, that payments weren't made on time. And then that there were kind of arbitrary or really what would be considered unfair reductions taken from those payments. So when we started seeing this with our data, we started recommending buyers improve when our data showed quite a few suppliers being paid late or facing those unfair reductions. And the problem has been highlighted for a new degree during the pandemic. So 4 companies decreased their late, 4 of the 10 companies decreased their late payment by an average of 10 days. And that's an improvement an important improvement with direct links to suppliers' abilities to make wage payments to workers. And just a reminder, though, as Kelly said, these data were collected before COVID-19 hit Asia and later the Western countries. So we'll be able to pick up in our annual data collection that will occur next spring whether those improvements have been able to be retained or at least recovered since as we hopefully emerge out of the pandemic.
Exactly. So Marsha, besides the data and the findings, one of the things that you touched on briefly before and that I think is really unique about Better Buying is that it really is the only thing out there asking suppliers to evaluate their buyers rather than the other way around. So Better Buying was really built to ensure that suppliers' voices were heard. And why would you say is supplier feedback and two-way dialogue so important?
Yeah, so suppliers participating in Better Buying's annual rating cycle are taking an advantage of an opportunity to make their voices heard. I've been studying these challenges for really a couple decades since I first heard the term, and I'm out talking with global manufacturers and suppliers about some of the challenges they face. And there wasn't a lot of take up on hearing those challenges, even though they were sharing them with their customers. There wasn't a lot of traction in addressing them. So this is an opportunity to send a clearer and more uniform message, I think, to really have suppliers' voices heard. And we do this by letting you communicate safely and anonymously with their buyers about purchasing practices that are working well and those that need improvement without risking their business relationships. So we've been told by suppliers that they won't provide open and honest feedback in many settings, which is why they need a trusted and an independent third party like Better Buying Institute, who can collect that data and prevent the identity of the suppliers being known, but also really surface the very rich ideas and solutions that these true partners can have in meeting supply chain demand. So by collecting the data, we can compare a company's score, a brand or retailer score, against an independent benchmark or an industry benchmark. And this has turned out to be a powerful motivator in making improvements. So when a buyer gets their report from us and they can see that they're performing poorly compared to peers in, say, example, forecasting or payment, then they want to make up that difference or pull ahead. So that's been a really exciting piece to see that, having that ability to compare with an industry benchmark, having that input from suppliers, and then having those ideas for solutions as well can really help toward making improvements. So that two-way dialogue between buyers and suppliers is critical to building stronger relationships that go beyond the contract. And, I think a lot of times we throw around the word partner in terms of suppliers, and, well, in the spirit of partnership, you need to do this for us or else, which is really not true partnership. So treating suppliers as true partners is crucial to solving pressing problems, because they often have the best ideas about overcoming obstacles, whether it's how to get something manufactured more efficiently, or how to work together collaboratively to meet customer demand.
So based on what we have heard from suppliers and what we found in our data, what would be your 2 to 3 pieces of advice or experience that you would want to share with a fellow professional?
Yep. So one thing is definitely work to build stronger relationships with your suppliers, and treating them as partners, as true partners, will strengthen that relation and create really new opportunities to collaborate for mutual gain. Look to establish that foundation of trust and create mutual sustainability objectives. And one way to do that is to hear them and to show that you hear them by making meaningful improvements. So then a second piece I would say is to look to build cross-functional support within your organization for better purchasing practices. Too often your CSR colleagues may have a different vision of success than you do, the same with the C-suite. So no matter where your company is on its sustainability journey, you can help support collaboration by advancing an understanding of the importance of better purchasing practices and the impact of your company's day-to-day decision-making on supplier compliance and working conditions, and how that, improvements can reduce supply chain business risks. And I just want to add another little important fact here. When I started talking with companies about this years ago, and a few leadership companies started to dig in to try to understand what about their day-to-day business practices were impacting or contributing to the non-compliances that they were trying to work with factories to address, whether it's excessive overtime or poor wages or discrimination or what have you. And when those leadership companies dug in, they started reporting back to me that anywhere from 50, and I even heard over 80% of the non-compliances that they were trying to work on with factories in their supply chain could be traced back to their own day-to-day business activity. So this is why this is really important. If you want to have good working conditions, you really must look at what you are doing and contributing to really preventing that. And then lastly, I would say base your sustainability efforts on data, not a hunch. So we could tell all brands and retailers to do certain things, but maybe you do really well on those certain things already. So there's a lot of value in being able to point to data from your suppliers to guide your efforts of where you spend your focus in trying to improve. And, often that data may confirm a hunch. We think we're kind of not very good at this, but what happens is then that you have data and you have a clarity on, the extent that that's impacting your supply chain. And that gives you that supporting information to drive new conversations inside your company about improvements. So Kelly, before we end, will you tell how a company can become a Better Buying subscriber and access our variable data?
Sure. So any brands or retailers that are interested in subscribing with us in 2021 can reach out to me directly. I will go ahead and put my email in the chat. And you can reach out to me if you have any questions about pricing or what it looks like to engage with us in more detail. Our next rating cycle is April 1st. So let us know sooner rather than later if you're interested, so that we can build in that time to get your supplier list together and work through the other details of your subscription. And then for suppliers, you can engage with us in 2 different ways, either by responding to an email that one of your customers sends to you an invitation to submit a rating, or you can go ahead and proactively submit ratings for all of your customers. You could sign up on our website to receive our emails, and we'll be sending out information about registering on our platform and how to submit ratings throughout the upcoming rating cycle.
Thanks, Kelly. So we really appreciate the opportunity Apparel Textile Sourcing Trade Shows has provided us to share a little information with you today. And we can go to listener questions now if there are any.
No questions, unfortunately, but I'd like to say that this is this show, especially this show cycle, we focus a lot on sustainability, and I'm really glad that you guys were able to shed some light on another. There's so many aspects to sustainability. It's not just about, you know, the fair labor or the environmental aspects. I think something as simple as having, you know, better buying practices, or, you know, having better relationships with your suppliers, and, you know, opening up that communication is something that, because I think a lot of things get lost in translation when you're working with your factories. Maybe you don't know their practices, or, you know, you haven't fostered that relationship enough. And I think people oftentimes in any business sector forget that what we're really doing in business is just a bunch of people communicating, trying to accomplish a goal. And the more effective you can do that communication, the better it is for both parties, the environment, the workers. It's just a level of transparency that I think is sorely needed. So it's really great that you guys are out there that can help, you know, guide the industry in that direction. So thank you so much for being here.
Great, thank you.
I would like to remind everybody, and as well as our speakers today, that we do have our virtual dashboard. I'm posting the link here. This is where you can go to not only view our exhibitors and our different country pavilions, but also to engage with our matchmaking virtual hangout, which I encourage the two of you, as well as our viewers, to visit. It's taking the place of our show floor. So, you know, it's a great place to network with other attendees, speakers. There's also the ATS show staff in there, so to answer any sourcing questions you might have, or if you have any questions about the show. So again, ladies, thank you so much. I look forward to hopefully seeing you in person at some point. And you stay safe and take care.
Great, great. Thank you. And
Thank
thanks
you.
for joining us today.
Of course. Take care.